Hey everyone, Sharkheart here, and in this video I'm going to cover how these special lunar reactions work, why they're bad, but also why they're necessary. We'll also go over these special interactions Lunar Charge can have that take it from a mediocre reaction to a very powerful part of combat, and how these special interactions can make certain 4-star characters more powerful and more valuable than 5 stars. If you learned something from this video and found it helpful, make sure to boop that like button and subscribe for more Genshin videos and live streams. Now let's go over how lunar reactions work. Lunar reactions, like Lunar Charged, are replacement reactions. That means that as long as a character who enables a lunar reaction is on the team, you'll trigger a special version of the reaction instead of the base version. For example, Anefa makes it so anytime a party member would trigger Electro Charge, they trigger Lunar Charged instead. Lunar reactions have similar properties to regular reactions, but there are plenty of important differences which we can see with Lunar Charged. Compared to Electro Charged, Lunar Charge ticks much slower, has much worse EM scaling, but it can crit. Most importantly though, Lunar Charge looks at the stats of all the characters who contributed to the reaction and then adds them all together with some big diminishing returns. The character who contributed the most damage to the Lunar Charge reaction has their Lunar Charge damage untouched, while the character who did the second highest Lunar Charge damage has their damage cut in half, and the characters with the third and fourth highest Lunar Charge reaction damage have that damage divided by 12. And then all those numbers are added together. This means that even though Lunar Charged looks at all 4 characters to determine the strength of the reaction, realistically only 2 of them are contributing any worthwhile damage. Keep in mind, these are just the different effects for Lunar Charged, and other lunar reactions will have different effects. I know this is probably a lot to take in, and there is still more to come, so here's a picture of a cute cat to say thanks for sticking with it. So lunar reactions, like Lunar Charge, can be a bit different from their standard base reactions, and you may be saying, well, I've seen characters like Anefa hit pretty hard with very little investment, so Lunar Charged is good, right? Well, not quite. You see, Lunar Charged as a reaction has a lower damage ceiling than Electro Charged. The Elemental Mastery scaling on Lunar Charged is much lower than on Electro Charged, meaning the more EM you build on a character in a Lunar Charged team, the less value it will have compared to on an Electro Charged team. For context, Electro Charge scales about 2.5 times better than Lunar Charge does at high investment. But Lunar Charge can crit, so that makes up for it, right? Kind of, but not really. Since the reaction can crit, it means your damage dealers don't need to build full EM to be good, and that's definitely a plus. But because Lunar Charged is slower than Electro Charged, and has big diminishing returns for the characters involved in the reaction, it is very underwhelming. If that was all there was to these reactions, it honestly wouldn't be worth making a video about them. However, there is another special version of these lunar reactions, dubbed Direct Lunar Reactions. And yes, I know, this is crazy. We have the base reaction, we have a special version of that base reaction called a lunar reaction, and then we have another special version of that lunar reaction called a direct lunar reaction. But let's try to make some sense of this. Direct lunar reactions come from talents and from abilities. For example, Anefa's first Ascension passive deals Lunar Charged damage, but since it comes from her passive ability, this is considered direct Lunar Charge damage. And this special version of Lunar Charge ignores enemies' defense and has its damage multiplied by 3. Considering how enemy defense works, this essentially makes Anefa's passive ability damage get a 2 times multiplier on top of a 3 times multiplier for a 6 times multiplier. This means that Anefa's direct Lunar Charged damage that comes from her passive ability does more than her entire kit combined. This distinction is really important because a lunar reaction like Lunar Charged can be a bad reaction, but if a character has an ability or a passive talent that allows them to deal direct lunar reaction damage, they will hit much, much harder. And this brings us to some interesting interactions in teams. For example, Lunar Charged contains the properties of both Hydro and Electro, and if you hit an enemy affected by Lunar Charged with Dendro, it will create a Dendro Bloom core. but it also causes the Quicken reaction, which will overtake the Lunar Charged aura on the enemy. That Quicken aura can be turned into an Aggravate reaction if you hit it again with Electro, but if you have enough Hydro, it will instead make another Dendro Bloom core. And of course, you could just have those Dendro cores explode, and maybe that would be fine with someone like Nilou and Lauma, but that's not the interesting part. Remember earlier how we talked about how Lunar Charged is slower than Electro Charged? This is actually an advantage here because the aura will last longer since it's not getting used up as quickly. And that means that a character like Anefa can end up triggering more Hyperblooms than another Hyperbloom trigger like Raiden. The only problem here is that all the elemental application has very strict timing to pull off, or the amount of Hyperblooms gets decreased by half. So this is all great on paper, but what does it mean in practice? It means that Lunar Reactions are another Neuvillette buff, and the Church of Neuvillette Stands sings once again. But it's not just Neuvillette. A lot of other characters are getting revitalized and becoming a lot more important. For example, Sucrose is becoming massively more useful, even to the point where it's getting hard to recommend Kazuha. Both of her passive abilities give your party members elemental mastery, and reactions like Lunar Charged look at multiple characters' elemental mastery. Her first Ascension passive can work with multiple elements at the same time, and her second Ascension passive works for the entire party, so both buffs can be incredibly useful. What's more is that a character like Kazuha adds damage %, but that doesn't actually increase the talent damage of a reaction like Lunar Charged, so Sucrose ends up being more useful in these teams. The good news here is that this makes a lot of older characters much more powerful thanks to the changes Lunar Reactions bring, especially direct Lunar Reactions. Here's looking at you, Nilou! It's time to take the spotlight again! I hope you found this video helpful without being too overwhelming. Make sure to boop that like button if you haven't already, share it with anyone who you think it can help, and make sure to stay jawsome, everybody.